Hello, friends. Welcome to, I feel like the CDC just handed the AHA, the AHA was like, hold my beer. They saw the CDC up guidelines that we talked about a few days ago, and they were like, watch what I can do. Hi, Georgiana. Hi, Mary Sal. Thanks for being here. Okay, so today, we are going to talk about the new AHA CPR guidelines, which are unsafe. And here's why. Here's our outline of topics we're going to talk about. Who even is the AHA? What prompted this change? Who does this new policy apply to? What does the new AHA guideline actually say versus what did the old one actually say? How does a real life code actually work? Because I don't think any of the people that wrote this have actually been in a code, maybe ever. And the summary, AKA people have no regard for healthcare workers. So that's what we are getting into today. um, Let me know your thoughts as we go through or questions. That's why I wanted to do this one live. I'm trying to get into, I'm going to try to do more like live reactions to things that are happening in real time so that we can actually talk about them versus like me posting it and then having it be this way. So that's the goal. So if you have anything to say, rant away. It's a safe little cozy space. Okay. If you are watching this on the replay, I'm going to have all the timestamps linked down below so you can just skip to whatever is interesting. If we've never met, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I got really angry that none of my patients could afford care, so I left, and now I work at an education company and I don't know what I'm doing with my life. So if you don't either, cheers. Okay, let us start. Hi, Danielle. Let's start with chapter 1. Let's see where my chapter 1 button is. What is, because we have buttons now. We're trying to use them. What is the AHA? I need to figure out how to get sound effects with them. That will make it much better. Okay, so the AHA, in case you're not familiar with it, is the American Heart Association. Let me see, I'm going to pull it up. I thought we could take a look at their website as we all gaze at it together. Here we go. The American Heart Association, it comes out with a lot of guidelines. It's kind of like the big boss when it comes to everything related to heart health, strokes, heart attacks, whatever. They also come out with the guidelines. They review the research based and tell us how to do CPR the best. So basically when people stop breathing or their heart stops, this is how we're supposed to revive them. They come out with the rules. They update them every now and then. They took it upon themselves to come out with an update specific to COVID-19. Let us see how they describe themselves, shall we? So the American Heart Association, just to get their background, I thought this was very fun. Our life-saving history. I was like, wow, you think well of yourselves, don't you? Rather than just being like a little bit about me, they're like, our life-saving history. This goes into their scientific research. They talk about their impact. Basically, none of this was overly helpful. So I just thought I would introduce them so we even know who we are talking about. Okay, let's hop into the next one of what even prompted this change? Like, why do we even need a new update? Doesn't the old one work? Well, so as they were doing their research and reviewing, like, hey, what has this said in the past? We got to see that they did review their data because they do that if you've been in healthcare, you know that, you have to do your CPR training every 2 years and you have to renew it, whether it's your basic or your advanced life support. And they come out with data and then they like kind of tweak it / totally redo the like CPR course, which is sometimes odd. You're like, like really, like, why are we doing this? And haven't we figured this out? We've been doing this for a very long time. Like when I first started, you started with compressions, and now I think, or no, maybe it was rescue breaths, and now you don't do rescue breaths until later, unless it's a kid and unless they can stand. It's like very complicated. I was like, the more complicated you make this, no one is ever going to know how to do this. Like healthcare workers can, but like the lay public, no one's going to know how to do this. So I feel like they've just made it so complicated that people are just going to be like, I don't want to touch you, and then be worried that they're going to sue you. Okay. Anyway, they were reviewing this data to decide, like, should we do 1 compression? Should we do 2 before we breathe? How do we dance it around? And they discovered that international data early during the COVID-19 pandemic described worse survival outcomes for both out of hospital and in hospital cardiac arrest compared to prior years. So basically, they looked at their data and they said, oh, wow, we're not doing a very good job keeping people alive when we do CPR. Side note, CPR, not overly effective. It's It's just not. If you've been in a lot of codes, most people don't come out of those things okay. I mean, we do it because what else are we going to do? But just so you know, like it's not ever been this astoundingly like helpful thing. If people are super, super ill, yeah, it's a thing. It's also a brutal process. Maybe if you guys are interested, we'll talk about what a code actually looks like because they're horrific, and I think we glamorize them a bit. Okay, this worsening of outcomes may have been multifactorial, may have been. We don't know. The severity of COVID related cardiac arrest, the implementation of termination of resuscitation guidance, the local crisis standards of care, or patient hesitancy to seek medical care contributing to delays in care. So, what they're basically doing here is saying CPR has not been as effective, and it's not our faults. It's not the new guidelines we came up with. It's your fault. And let me explain why. And we're going to try to fix it. So the AHA is first coming out and saying, it's not our methods, friends. It's how you're implementing them. So let's just lay the groundwork for that first. Is they are saying it is not my bus that broke, friend. It was you driving it. That's the reason it combusted and caught on fire. So it's not their fault. It's our fault. The worsening of outcomes that may have been multifactorial, like we said, that's just they're acknowledging that the worsening outcomes are not their fault. They probably are relying on a bunch of things, such as the severity of COVID-related cardiac arrest. That just means people who are having cardiac arrest related, like when their heart stops. Cardiac arrest is when your heart stops, and a heart attack. I guess we can differentiate those because they can be confusing. Cardiac arrest is when your heart decides it's done and it stops. It can stop for a multitude of reasons. Heart attack, when you call it like a heart attack, that means that part of the blood supply to your heart has stopped. A heart attack can lead to cardiac arrest, but you often are having a heartbeat. You are not in cardiac arrest if you necessarily are having a heart attack. That's why you experience chest pain and you're able to verbalize it and go to the hospital. So that's just kind of it's saying that if you have COVID, by the time your heart is stopping, you're usually much sicker than maybe people were before, which makes a lot of sense because we see people are being very, very ill by this. So that's their first point of acknowledging. We're just going to go through and see their argument because it matters in a minute. The another thing that they acknowledge could be related to this was the implementation of termination of resuscitation guidance. So basically what there were other, as this pandemic has come out, there's always usually a general consensus about when you're going to stop CPR. Typically that is when, so if you're doing CPR, you're running the code, you're doing compressions, they're ventilated now, you're pushing all the meds. There comes a time when the person who is running the code usually says, if they're assessing and like it's been a certain amount of time, it all factors in based on what's the patient's history, how likely are they to recover from this in general? What was their status? If it was a young, healthy person, I mean, they're going to work on them for so long. They're going to keep the code going because the person went into it really well. If this person has been sick for a very long time, their chances of recovering are just poorer. So there's no point in doing a 2-hour code. At that point, there's no oxygen left going to their brain anyway. But you know what I mean? Like there's just, the outcomes aren't going to be good. So that person kind of weighs, what is this person's chance of coming back? How long have we been doing this? Has anything even slightly worked, or has nothing we've tried even moved the marker a little? That person decides, hey, I'm going to does anyone have any other ideas? Is usually what they ask first. They say, hey, we're thinking does anyone have any other ideas? The entire room then usually gets quiet. Sometimes someone's like, we could try this. And then we try that. If no one else in the room says they have any ideas, then the person leading the code then says, does anyone have any objections if we stop? And then you're allowed to object. I have been in many situations where someone either came up with a new idea or someone said, let's just keep trying. If no one says, if there's no objections, usually everyone kind of goes around the room in my experience and says, it's not just that there's no sound. It's like everyone verbally says I have no objections or no objections, kind of making it a group thing of I think we've done everything we can here. And after that has happened, everyone steps away and stops. And when we've verified there's no heartbeat, there is no breath, then they call the time of death. So what they're saying in this I said all of that just to say the implementation of termination of resuscitation. With COVID, there were different guidelines. I think some hospitals, they came out with things and they said, we're going to stop this much sooner. If you have this, we're not going to go. I've been in codes that have lasted well over an hour. And they stopped that. They said, hey, we're not going to just like go for this and not stop. We're eventually going to stop here. So the AHA is trying to say like some of these cardiac related deaths from COVID patients might have been because we didn't do an extensive code that was, like an hour long. I personally have never seen a code that went that long, like longer than what most of the resuscitation guidance said, that ended well. Because you're not oxygenating very well, it's not effective. Some places in their emergency things were even saying, when they said their crisis things came out, they said they were not going to perform resuscitation. I don't live in any of those states that passed the things saying like, hey, if you are like, we're not going to do codes. I know that was in some people's crisis things. So if you live in one of those states, feel free to let me know in the chat, like what that looked like. I don't know a lot about it. I know it was in states that were hit really, really hard where they were just not going to try to resuscitate you if you coded. But I don't know enough about that. So I don't know if that would have been enough to like sway the data in this, that like that was implemented so many times. But anyway, that's what that sentence meant. Local crisis standards of care, which is what we just talked about. How are they going to triage you if they find you, if they report to a house and the person isn't breathing? If they're in a crisis state, then they technically don't have to try to bring them back if they have that law in place. That could have related to it. I don't think that one's going to affect it a ton too. I think the local crisis standards of care thing, that would be less than the next one, which is patients' hesitancy to seek medical care contributing to delays in care. This is huge. I'm from primary care, and I can't tell you how many of my patients did not go and seek medical care in just general, like they weren't going to the cardiologist, they weren't going to their kidney doctor, they weren't doing anything like that. So people were getting much, much sicker before they presented to the hospital having a heart attack, which makes it, like we talked about, much, much more difficult. And the outcomes are going to be much, much poorer if you're going into this being super duper sick. The next thing, continuing this paragraph of things of what the AHA thinks might have caused it, the provision of prompt chest compressions and defibrillation may have been delayed due to additional time in donning PPE or securing an airway. And that one we're going to talk about in much more length because that is what they've chosen to work on addressing in this. So they are saying that healthcare workers were unable to go in and start CPR because they were busy getting on their PPE. So it's definitely partially our fault, apparently, or securing the airway, because heaven forbid we go and gown up for like 2 seconds before running into the room and securing the airway, which I think they're forgetting. I know they're the American Heart Association. And so I get it. Like, hearts are very important. We should start CPR to get those puppies pumping. But lungs are also really key here. And I feel like they have a little bit of a bias because they're American Heart Association, but the airway, you need that. That is kind of like if you're learning, in school, we learned the ABCs: airway, breathing, circulation. I've always thought that the American Heart Association probably felt a little bit bad because they were last. Airway and breathing are both respiratory and circulation comes last. So I feel like here they're saying, our method is not working because you're bothering to get dressed up and worry about the respiratory system. So if you just worried less about saving this person's airway, we would be fine. Albeit there's absolutely no point of doing CPR if you don't have an airway, would be my rebuttal, because how are you oxygenating? What are you pushing around if you can't oxygenate it? But that's just me. What do I know? Concerns that resuscitation from cardiac arrest due to COVID-19 may be futile, may have led to earlier termination of resuscitation efforts. Like we talked about, they're worried, oh, you're so sick, this isn't going to even work. Let's just stop. I think a lot of that has to do with, though, by the time you're dying from COVID, if you're in the ICU and you're in kidney failure, it is much more than just like almost everyone when they're in the hospital, almost always, it's more than just your heart. Okay. We're not just like jumpstarting your heart. We're trying to jumpstart your heart and your nothing else is working with us. So you don't have kidney function, you don't have liver function. It's not just like this one, they're making it, I feel like, sound very simple, but I could be just grumpy and overanalyzing it. Concerns. Where did we? Oh yeah, they blamed us for getting dressed up and for wanting to save the airway. Um, and overwhelmed emergency medical services systems may have had insufficient resources to respond to increased number of calls for arrest in regions of high rate of COVIDness. So basically, then saying that overwhelmed like EMS, so like ambulances, paramedics, everyone like that, haven't been able to get people to the hospital in time because their systems are overwhelmed. And I don't doubt that at all. I think that's very, very likely. I'm going to do finish this paragraph out, and then I'll look at some of the comments that I saw popped up. And lastly, the last things that the AHA thinks could be happening is significant delays in presentation for medical care. Yes, that is very true. People are getting sicker by the time they go in. The effort is then, it's much harder to fix someone when they are more broken. Such as tripling the time from onset of chest pain to presentation to emergency room. Yes, I myself have had patients who did not go to the emergency room when they were having chest pain that did turn out to be a heart attack. Because they didn't want to, especially in the beginning when we just didn't know anything. And COVID was, not that it's not terrifying now, but in the beginning we had no idea, and everyone seemed like they were dying from it. You're also usually sick. Let's look at the main people who usually are the most likely to have a cardiac event is going to be our older population, our population that has a lot of other comorbidities. They're not usually sometimes they're like perfectly healthy, but a lot of times they have other stuff going on. They are the people that we were saying you are at the most risk of getting COVID and dying, are the same people who are most likely to have the chest pain and have the cardiac event. So they're not going to want to go to the hospital because they think they're going to go in and never come out, was something that was told to me many times. Like, I'm not going to go in. I'm worried I'm never going to come out of there. And families weren't allowed in, and it was just a mess. Also, my dog and children are awake now, so you may hear them. Welcome. So that is what contributed to that. So that is kind of like the setting of what they were saying of this is the situation. And all of that. All right, let's look at the comments really quick. Tina said, you have been such a help and inspiration. Oh, thank you. Let's go back to the beginning when everyone's just saying nice things about me. That sounds lovely. Hi, Chase. I'm glad you're finally at one of these. Hi, Amelia. Hi, Lori. Wilbur. I love the name Wilbur. I keep trying to get Avery to name one of her animals Wilbur, and I have had zero success, but I will keep trying. You've reignited that fire within me. I'm like, Wilbur, she's like, no. And then she comes up with these, she's sitting out there, so I can't talk about the names she thinks, but they're weird. How do I do hands-on CPR, Patrick? I'll do a whole video on maybe CPR at one point, if that would be interesting. Because Annette, you're right. CPR is awful in real life. I feel like a lot of times people think like, oh, we're just going to go in there and it's going to be fine. And it's rough. It's something that I counseled people a lot in primary care about. I was like, this is not going to be pretty. Do you really want to do this? Like, kind of describing, you come out of it, your ribs are all broken, they're bruised, you're just holes it's a mess. And it said many times people requiring CPR have many comorbidities that impact outcomes. Yes. So if you are, and I think the weird thing here with the AHA guidelines was they didn't take into account that COVID existed. So you can't compare that to our baseline if you've entered another player in the game. So you can't be like, oh, our CPR outcomes are worse than before when you've entered something else in, rather than just being like, hey, the problem is COVID. They've tried, the whole thing that they came out with this is they're trying to problem solve it. And I'm like, hey friend, I know I didn't do all the research for you, but I think the problem is COVID. I think that's the whole problem. I don't think it's our problem. I don't think anybody needs to risk themselves anymore to fix this problem. I think it's just COVID and it stinks. Let's see. Georgiana said, codes are so traumatic. They're so sad. They really are. And they're also, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about codes later, but they're not as frantic as I think people make them out to be, because when you usually you work on a floor that does a lot of them, and I feel like the way they described it, like, oh, you don't have time to put on PPE. I'm like, friend, why don't you have time to put on PPE? But we'll talk about that more in a minute. Cheryl said most of the resuscitations I have seen involved were somehow overdose related, and it's going to totally depend on where you work. Some of whatever obviously type of unit you're on, it's going to be different. And interestingly, this had me like looking through all the AHA guidelines, and there's different, you resuscitate people differently related to overdose, and these haven't actually changed. The overdose rate ones haven't changed from before because they're not related to COVID. They're related to an overdose. How do you hold your hands in CPR? Like this. Get your kind of the heel of your hand goes in and you keep your arms straight. For people, let me see. My sister's moderating it for me. And she said for people asking about CPR, she's not going to talk about this. And then I talked about it. Sorry. Okay. Let me see. You hit the nail on the head. Thanks, Cheryl. I don't remember what I said. God forbid we protect ourselves by gowning up before doing CPR on a patient in COVID. Yes, absolutely. Josh, I'm glad they're informative. Watching before I head into work at 3, but oh, thanks, Maddie. Caitlin said, yes, I'm in NP school now, and having someone else who has experienced help break this down and work it out really matters. Oh, good. I'm glad. Hi, Sophia. Elizabeth said, shouldn't we always protect ourselves before helping others? Yes. Yes, we should. We'll get there. It's like the airplane. Got to put your mask on first. Yeah, I'm going to go put PPE on even if someone is coding because I can't get COVID, because then I can't go to the other codes. Yes. Hi, Monty. Okay. So that's kind of the background of why they updated it. Again, not their problem, someone else's problem. Let's see. Who does the new policy apply to? Let us take a look. So the new policy that they came out with, it applies to, so again, we'll read it and then we'll go back and we'll look at these. Basically, it's just people with COVID. With increased scientific knowledge, a more stable PPE supply chain, so more, it's easier to get masks, and vaccination of frontline healthcare providers and general public, application of the best resuscitation science available must be once again assessed. So this is them saying our method's not working. Let's just go back and look at the data so we can figure out how to blame other people and be prioritized. The following guidance should be applied to patients with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 infection. So if you think your patient could have COVID, they get funneled into this pile. You would think you would be like more protective of, staff if it was COVID, but hold my beer, CDC, the AHA said, hold on, I got you. The standard 2020 CPR algorithms and recommendations for resuscitation should apply to those patients who are known to be COVID negative. So if you know they don't have COVID, you can just go back to the old ways. That's totally fine. Let me see. Julie said, I just got ACLS certified yesterday. ACLS, if you aren't familiar, is advanced cardiac life support. That's what we do in the hospital. It involves all the injecting of all the medicines, all the whole kit and caboodle. They seem to think adding positions is going to help, not considering that being understaffed is still a huge issue. What do you mean, like positions like, oh, this is your job versus this is your role type of thing? I don't know if that's going to help. I feel like, and this is another thing of like, we're not retaining staff. So on a unit where CPR is, where you have staff that has been there for a little while, this is why it's important to retain staff. You are kind of a well-oiled machine. Like, codes are no longer, the first floor I worked on, we had them all the time, like just all the time. And it was no longer, it honestly wasn't even a panic thing. It was like, okay, this is happening. Everyone knows their role. We've all been there. We've all done this. We know the residents who are leading it. We know like the respiratory therapist, we know the pharmacist, the social worker, and everyone kind of could come together. And it was always sad. And there was obviously that franticness to it, but it wasn't chaos. Everyone kind of knew what they were doing. So yes, roles are helpful, but if you have all new people or you're working with a bunch of travelers who have different ways that they do things, that's when the chaos happens. And that is why it is so important to retain your staff and pay them well and keep them, and not do things like make them come to work with COVID and then hate them so they're going to quit because then you don't know how to work. It's like trying to do a dance with people who were in different ballet schools and have never worked together. It's not going to go very well. Elizabeth said codes are very romanticized, especially with older folks. Yeah, we might bring grandma back, but she's not going to do well. People generally don't do very, very well if they weren't well going into it. They have a new CPR coach position to the ACLS team. Please, I need to look that up. What does the coach do? Are they like you're doing a great job? Maybe they're watching the compressions. I don't know. In history, though, that was like the person who led the code would sometimes, like in my experience, the person who was leading the code would sometimes be like, hey, Liz, like you need to go a little bit slower, or you need to push deeper, or I don't see the chest rise. They were doing those things, or they were throwing out ideas. So let me know what the coach is. That sounds, I shouldn't laugh. This is a very serious matter. But in my mind, the coach is much more of like a, I don't know. I don't even know. What would they be doing? Knee-jerk policies are never good. Who said our supply chains are restored? Once again, these are policies that don't rely on outcomes, data, or new research. Agreed. That is the problem here, is that we're kind of jumping into a lot of things without data, which science is good. We like science here. And I'm worried that now we're like, I feel like we're being abandoned. Like our mantra this entire time has been like, just follow the science. And now the CDC and the AHA are like, follow the, like, that thing on TikTok or the meme where it's like, repeat after me. And you're like, follow the science, follow the science. And we're like, follow the science. And they're like, I'm going to go this way. They were like, I'm going to actually listen to the hospital. Like they're yelling at me louder. And we're like, no, that's not right, friend. So if we're supposed to ignore PPE for COVID, shouldn't this include other diseases? Exactly, like TB and the flu and all of that. One would think, retro gamer tie, one would think so, but apparently they think not. Those 3 seconds, they're going to really matter. They coach the compressor separate from the team leads, specifically to watch the rate and quality of compressions and body mechanics. And they think we need one. I'm sorry, that's stupid. But again, I don't think they've really been in a code because it's crowded. We're going to need to do one of these about a code because we have a lot to say. It's really crowded when you're doing a code. There's not a lot of room in that room without a coach. So I can't imagine doing it with a coach who's telling me something that could be done by the person leading the CPR at the foot of the bed who usually has the best understanding. So this is stupid. Let me know if your hospitals have implemented it. I say it's dumb. When I rule the world, I will cancel that position. So you have more room to get around and you aren't going to trip on each other. Okay. And I said, follow the Yellowbrook Road. That's what it feels like. Okay. Let us see. So now we have the changes. What prompted them? We know who the policy applies to. Just COVID patients. Nobody else that's sick. They're fine. They can die. It's fine. What do the guidelines say? So many of you have probably already seen this over on the good old social media. Oh, I need to scooch this way. Okay. I did it backwards. This is the general guideline. This is what it says. It comes up with lots of interesting things. We're not going to read them because most of them I haven't done the research I didn't go through and actually perform their studies. So sure, if you want to not do all of these other things, then whatever. I'm just going to talk about the one that particularly annoyed me, which was going to be, actually, can we find the one that talks about, because they were all up in a tizzy about not for defibrillator as soon as possible. Duh. Do not delay defibrillation for the application of masks or PPE. So you should just like run right on in there and get those pads on that person. Securely attach HEPA filter, ventilate with a bag mask till seal is tight. Engage the intubator with the highest chance of first pass success. As if you would like intubate someone and be like, I hope this fails. Here, send Tim in. Tim is bad at intubating people. We're going to send Tim in. No, friend. I have never seen, like in the hospital, I have never seen the younger, like the newer residents be the one going into a code. They're usually learning how to like intubate in the operating room, or when it's a non-emergent situation, when we're choosing to put someone on a ventilator. I have never, ever seen someone who did not feel somewhat competent intubating someone in a code when they're trying to die. So yes, good job, American Heart Association. Thank you for telling us to try to find someone who's done this before. Oh my gosh. Consider Consider the use of video laryngoscopy if available. So, like, if you don't feel like you can intubate well, use the laryngoscope, which is like the camera. Like, duh, if they feel like they need that. But again, most people don't come with that. Like, you're doing this at the bedside, dum dum. Okay. Maximize chest compress. Okay. So this is all just silly. Like, it's just saying, like, please do what we already told you to do, but do it well. Let's look at the part that was really annoying. Okay. Um, Rapidly do not delay chest compressions for provider PPE. So don't put on your PPE, which is like your mask, your shield, your gloves, all of that to place, um, or do not place a face covering on the patient. Now, this part, the first part enraged me, and the second part just made me go, have you ever done CPR? Because it's really difficult to do the bag valve mask thing to, like, give somebody the oxygen if they're wearing a mask. So I wasn't planning on putting that type of mask on them. I feel like someone said, like, they're running in and they're putting the mask on the patient, but they didn't realize that it was like the bag valve mask, not a regular mask. Like, AHA, we are not putting a surgical mask on the patient. You realize that, right? In the setting of a code, when we say we're going to put the mask on, it has oxygen in it. It's really good for them. That's what we're trying to keep them alive. So that part gave me a good giggle, which I needed. I was like, I need a little bit of comic relief. So I will refrain from putting a surgical mask on the patient. I will put the bag valve mask on them. I will do that. I will give them oxygen since they don't have any. But the delay of the chest compressions for PPE. This, we'll come back to it. We're going to talk about this when we talk about how a code actually works, because it makes no sense. All this is basically saying is you are not as important as the patient, which in this setting, you're kind of like, I'm at work. Like, you do remember that this is my job, and you don't get to tell me, like, that would be literally kind of like, I don't know, people might get mad that I'm making these analogies. It's like telling a fireman to run into the burning building without putting their outfit on first, because, like, someone with COVID inside is in there. So they need to get them out quicker. Like, I'm going to take the 3 seconds. I'm going to put my stuff on. It's going to take me 20 seconds. And then I'm going to go in there like we always have. Like, what? And also it's completely disregarding the fact that you're probably already in the room. Someone is probably already in the room. If they are that sick with COVID and now they are, like, actively dying, there's usually a lot of alarms that are going on as someone's oxygen is going like, or if they're just not doing well at all, usually there's someone in there with them. They're in there and they're trying everything they can to keep this patient from dying. So they're not alone, and they're probably already wearing all the PPE. So they're going to start chest compressions. They're going to get things going, or at least set up, because a fun fact, it takes a moment to set up for CPR. You have to drop the bed. You have to get the board under them. You have to kind of situate the scene. It takes a second. So it is not like you running in there naked and being like, I'm going to do chest compressions is going to, like, that is not American Heart Association. That is not the problem here. Okay. It's not the fact that we didn't get to put our dresses on and go into this room. That is not the problem here. The problem is COVID. You are worth more than exposure. I don't care if this is COVID. I don't care if it's the flu, if it's tuberculosis. Do not go into a room with someone who is on contact precautions of some type without getting yourself all set first. Okay? Because you need to put your little airplane mask on before other people put their airplane mask on. Otherwise, like someone already said, there's not going to be any people left to do the CPR. Okay. Although the CDC did say that non-paid employees still had to come to work, even if they had COVID. So maybe the volunteers will show up when the hospital forces them somehow to show up and do the chest compressions. Okay. So now that we've got that squared away, are they saying to intubate without wearing PPE? That is what it seems like. Like, do not delay that. Just go for it. So if you don't know, when you are intubating someone, that is when you create the most aerosolization, which is how COVID spreads the easiest. So basically, you're all up in that person's airway where the COVID comes from. and you're just in there and like, so they are basically saying like it's totally fine, just go in there, intubate. At that point you are almost guaranteed to get COVID or whatever disease it is at this point. um if you're the person intubating them, because you're all up in their airway, which is what is spewing the thing that is trying to kill them. So that's showing a blatant disregard. And this, I'm not gonna, in this whole thing with like the CDC and the AHA, I won't lie, I am a small part. No, I'm not happy at all, but I'm really glad that we all got lumped into this together, because I feel like this really threw all healthcare workers under the bus. And it's something that like everyone can get annoyed about versus just nurses. Cause I feel like a lot of times we get mad about things and everyone else is just like, yeah, we are, whatever. Um, but this is Danielle. Oh, I wish I could repeat that. But I don't think I can. Look in the live chat. It's funny. It we're all in this together for once. And I feel like now, like the, like physicians and the respiratory therapists can get mad with us versus people being like, oh, nursing's throwing a fit. Now it's like, no, everyone's throwing, the whole family's mad now. The whole family is very annoyed because this is very dangerous for any CRNAs, any, if you have like paramedics that intubate, if you have anesthesiologists, if you just have regular, physicians that are intubating, PAs, this is dangerous for everyone. Oh man, I've just woken up 6:30 a.m. Whoa, oh yeah, you live in Australia, right? And man, am I filled with rage. Ooh, this is a not good way to start your day. I am so sorry. Could there be any repercussions for ignoring this recommendation and just putting on your PPE beforehand? Does this mean we can get sued for donning? Okay, so this is where I was going to talk about this. I'm not sure, like the silver lining of this is I'm not sure that you could be sued for anything like this because, and like your hospital, I don't think, oh, sorry if that made a noise. Your hospital, I don't think can have any recourse to actually get you in trouble because I don't see that standing up ever in court from a legal perspective. No one could ever pinpoint the fact that their family member died because you took the 20 seconds to put on PPE. That just would never, ever stand up. So the silver lining of this is basically that there's no repercussion. Always put on your PPE. The hospital, I don't think, is going to legally be able to come after you. It's just insulting that they came out with this in the first place. And it'll be more insulting if the hospitals come out and they say, hey, we support this, because that's horrifying. But I don't want anyone to think that they actually have to do this, because here's the thing, you don't. It will never, ever, ever, ever hold up in court. And I don't think, okay, so here's the other thing. The hospital administration, we already know they're not going to be at the code. Goodness knows they're not going to be there. So, and I don't think anyone's going to rat you out. They're not going to be like, Retrogamer Ty actually took the time to put on his PPE before entering this room. And those 20 seconds, it's not the fact that this patient had multi-system organ failure and we coded them for 45 minutes and they've been intubated for a week. None of that matters. If he had come in here without his PPE on, we could have saved her. Like, no one's going to say that. So no one's going to rat you out. Put your PPE on. It's just more the concept of it. Let me see. And I said, can we be coworkers? We would roll with honesty, edged with snarky humor. Yes. Yes, please. Except I don't really want to work inpatient right now because I'm just like, ooh. Piano nurse. Oh, I play the piano too. It sounds insane for them to say that people should just risk their lives for a few seconds of putting on PPE. Yes, it really does. Because how long does it take you? That's the other thing. I'm like, I get that most of the people who are writing this document are probably older, and maybe it takes them, like with their arthritis. Okay, I need to stop and not. Maybe it takes them a long time to put on the gloves and everything. I keep going back to like, because they're ancient. But maybe it takes them a long time to don PPE. I don't know. Look, I made a banner for this. We can all give our input if I can figure it out. Oh, nope. I have to take away the comment first. Bear with me. How long does it take you to put on PPE? Because it takes me not very long. I might just be very young and youthful and nimble, but I feel like I could, while scooching down the hallway, you're grabbing the mask, you're slapping it on, you're sliding into your outfit. You don't even need to tie it. Many times I have not tied the back of my gown. You throw the face mask on and there you go. Even if you have to put like an N95, like how much have we used those? It doesn't take that long, like 20 seconds max. Like the longest thing about putting on your PPE is actually the bottleneck of everyone trying to be the hero and wanting to be involved in the code. Like that's the longest thing. So maybe what we should have really done here was like prioritized at the beginning. I don't know, like who's actually going to show up and then have someone, maybe that's what the coach could do. The coach could stand there and be like, not you, you go back over there. Like you're not very good at this either. You go over there and like delegate the people who want to be there. Like that horde of humans that stands outside the door and is like, I'll go get the flush. Like, tell me what you need. Like the coach could actually be like, actually, Susan, I need you to go back over there and take care of the other half of the floor that might be dying right now. Like that would be a really good use actually for the coach, would be a door monitor, and they wouldn't even need to put on PPE. They could just stand there and be like, no, please go away. Nope, we have plenty of people. Nope, please go away. There we go. That can be the coach's job. Let's see how long it takes other people to do. Come on, tell me how long it takes you to put on your PPE, especially when someone is coding. You're going to put on PPE very quickly. And yes, Sherry, we have lots of practice in putting on PPE. It doesn't take, it's not that hard. Sherry says, might as well stay donned all day if we are going to work sick anyway. Seriously, like what is even... What is the point? Aw, Dree, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate you. Writers are desk jockeys. That's probably true. The people are probably like, I watched Grey's Anatomy once and I saw a code. It's definitely these people's fault. This is how it goes. Sophia, do you know what percentage of COVID patients were intubated, have been discharged? Because I think this percentage is low. I think so too. So I think, like I said in the beginning, I think AHA, the problem here is not us and how we're doing the CPR. I think the problem is COVID. But I know that's really problematic because that's, not something you can really do anything about and your numbers look bad. But I think it's not our fault. I think it's COVID and it's killing people. That's fine. Let's see. These recommendations are the product of OJR on the job retired, or desk jockeys having a Captain Obvious moment just to piss off the working public and more. I agree. These are, like they said, these are people who have not worked in a very long time and have watched codes on TV and they're like, back in my day, we had, I don't even know what's an old timey thing. They'd be like, we had hooked them up to the glass tubes and bled them during a code and hoped for the best as their earth spirit came out. Or something. They were like, I remember that. I don't need a mask for that. Our sister's giving me eyeballs to rein it in. Okay, I'll rein it in. But yes, the green bile, the biles. We're definitely out. The humors. That's the word I was looking for. The humors are coming out. So that's the mindset of the people that wrote this. So that's really good. Maybe palliative care and hospice could be the topic instead of these ridiculous measures to save lives. Exactly. If we're looking at what is actually going to affect long-term outcomes, it's probably going to be palliative care, having the conversations to say, should we even code you? Why are we, if you really want to improve, that's a really good point, Danielle. Okay. Like why, if you want to improve your numbers, why don't we focus more on having the conversations with people before we even get to the code to say, is this really what you want for your loved ones? This is what it's probably going to result in. And it's probably not going to go well. That would be a much better resource. And then your percentages are going to get better, right? You're going to code less people and the people who you are going to have better outcomes. I have a whole video I will leave below. I actually got to interview a palliative care NP recently, and that's what I've decided I might need to do one day is palliative care. And she talks all about like her role in the hospital of having those conversations of just like, hey, this is what this is looking like. And it was very interesting. And she talks about what her job is, like what a day in her life as a inpatient palliative care NP is, what resources there are if you want to become one, all of that. So that's interesting. And I'll leave that link down below. And Annette said, if you are coding a COVID patient, chances are they will not recover no matter how you recover circulation. They will require a ton of support to the time of their prolonged death. Exactly. So it's kind of the conversation of why are we torturing people? Why are we doing this? Let me see. Okay. What chapter do we go to now? Okay. My thing of before of the chart was the whole table and then the really bad part. Okay, so what are the standard guidelines? This is helpful when we're comparing because we should always compare something. Thank you, Rachel. Rachel just linked the palliative care video in the thing. In case you want to go and watch it later. Don't watch it right now. Don't leave me alone. My chronic fear of going live is I'll be alone. What does the standard of care say? Because as always, we should always link back to what is actually happening in the normal world in order to figure out like what are the guidelines here. And they are, oh, that should go away. Interesting. So if you go and you look at the normal guidelines, I didn't put all of them in there because I feel like they're all of the normal things, but I found this as a really great summary point. Giving CPR. Step 1, check the scene for safety. Form an initial impression. So walk up to the door, be like, oh dear, Timothy is not doing well. I must go in and we should code Timothy. And use personal protective equipment. So step 1 in a traditional environment is put on your PPE. Well then, so in every other setting, we're putting on PPE. I feel like the first thing you learn in any ACLS is the scene safe? When you're doing like, if you've never been to a BLS training, it's kind of funny because they look around, they're like, stop. Is the scene safe? And then the whole time you're all usually in a big conference room and you're doing it together with like your coworkers and all these other random people. Because the hospital's getting you all like certified at the same time and you stop there. And that's always the part that like, maybe I just don't take anything in life seriously and I should, but I was always very dramatic when I had to assure the safety. Is my scene safe? Okay. And then one time I tried to make it so the scene wasn't safe and I said there was a bear and the lady very sternly, she's like, ma'am, we are not joking here. And I was like, I'm sorry. Okay. So is the scene safe? The scene is not safe if you can't follow step 1, which is don the PPE. Ruth said, yes, more reason for nurse-driven palliative care consults. Yes. Can you actually refer to palliative care as a nurse? That's awesome. I did not have that power as a nurse. So if you aren't familiar, different nurses, depending on the state that you live in, they get to kind of, sometimes you can do referrals to different things. Like when I was a nurse, I could refer to dietary, but I couldn't refer to palliative care. I could refer to social work, but I couldn't refer to like physical therapy or things like that. And it sounds like this person can put in a referral to palliative care as a nurse, which is awesome. The palliative care team being involved would be a big plus in these situations, but recently it's been made harder for physicians to become palliative care practitioners, which reduces our experts. I'm interested. Are you a palliative care person? Because I might make you come on in my channel and talk to me. I'm interested what makes it harder to become a palliative care practitioner. Side note. Okay. Luna said, hospital just notified that we are following the new CDC guidelines. Lovely. The ones that's in my other video, I'll leave that. That's already linked down below that says you can come to work with COVID as long as your symptoms are mild, and mild symptoms are defined as not being hospitalized. So everybody, all you have to say is you are hospitalized and you need to start coming up with outrageous symptoms. Be like, as soon as my diarrhea stops, I'll be there. As soon as it stops. Oh, and then just like hang up. Okay. That's going to be our method. Let me see. You could pretend to hallucinate from a super high fever. All is welcome. Unrelated, but have you done a video on your Lecturio job? I think I did. I think it's called, I'll put it down in the bio once I find it. Like my non-traditional NP job. I think that's what I called it. Basically what I do, I work for Lecturio, which is nursing. I work for their nursing department. Like it's a education thing that goes along with nursing school. And it's been fun, very different, but very fun. Scene is safe. BS. Oops. That's EMS. Let me see where it says states like where I work have palliative care APRNs and PAs, but cannot practice without an overwatcher or MDR or DO, limiting palliative care even further. Yeah. And that's in most places, unless you have autonomous practice. But even then, there's like palliative care certifications for NPs, but I would imagine you'd need to train under someone else since that's not a specialty you can go to NP school for. Yeah, that's a mess. RICU tried, however, were epically shut down by the chief of staff. I wonder what were you shut down for? Mika said, I'm a huge fan. Where do you work? Hello from Ontario, Canada. Oh, thank you. Lecturio. I am no longer working inpatient. I'm in a crisis as to what I want to do as a nurse practitioner. So I'm just taking a moment's break and doing that while I figure out my life because I worked in primary care and I thought I would live and die in primary care because that's what I went to school for. And I love the patient education aspect of it. However, none of my patients could afford anything that I recommended. So I got really frustrated after 3 years and then the pandemic, and here we are. It's okay to pivot. So if you need to pivot, that's okay. At a large hospital system in North Carolina, that's where this person works. For the new CDC guidelines. We just moved from North Carolina. We lived near Raleigh. Where do you live, Caitlin? Pivot. If I knew how to insert things, that would be from Friends. Pivot. They must go through the residency and specify palliative care fellowship for 2 to 3 years. Oh man, that's a lot. Yeah, to become a palliative care nurse. Palliative care driven consults. What did it say? Oh, they were trying to Russ said that they were trying to nurses to be able to initiate palliative care consults because you would think, I mean, that seems very within the scope of being able to, do that, but they were shut down by their chief of staff. Lovely. Luna said, Luna works in Raleigh. I delivered at Rex. If that's the hospital that you work at, I had my second daughter in Raleigh. Okay. So how a code actually works. We've kind of already talked about a lot of this, so we won't go back and talk about it again. But the main point I wanted to make here was usually when someone is coding, especially if they have COVID, people are already in the room. This is not a shock to most people when this is happening. So there's already someone in there. So there's no need to come out with rules that says you should go and sacrifice yourself. You should never sacrifice yourself. Your job is not to sacrifice yourself. Your job is to show up, assess patients, give medication, help them feel better, do all of those things. That is a healthcare worker's job, not to like lay on the sword and get the illness you're trying to save the patient from. That just doesn't seem smart. So this rule is just offensive. That's the bottom line. Don't ever follow it. Like I said, there's going to be no repercussions. There is no reason ever why, even if no one is in the room with the patient, why that 10 seconds that it takes you to grab a gown, throw it over your head, pull the mask down, do the thing, should take that long. And if you are unable to put all of that on in less than, I don't know, a minute, someone else will have been in there already. I promise. Like, we're in a serious situation if you're the only one on the floor. And then this is happening. So that's how a code usually works. We already talked about everything else. We just jumped ahead earlier, which is totally fine. Summary. There is no regard for healthcare workers. There's none. And that's kind of the final thing here is that not that this is practice changing. This is just like embarrassing and sad. Like how little you think of people that you would say, I recommend you just go in and like sacrifice yourself for this. And I think people have completely lost sight of the fact that this is like a job and not like were it my mother in that room? Yeah. But I love my mother a lot. I don't know this person. This is my job. Like, you know what I mean? This is not a personal thing. This is your job. Why are you asking me to go and risk my life for my job? I will risk my life for people I love, but not for Nancy in room 62. I'm just sorry. But this goes into a whole other thing of we used to have, oh, I won't even go there, like active shooter drills. And one time we had one and then we got in trouble for like not going and sheltering our patients. And I was like, I'm hiding. Like if that's happening, I'm hiding. Just weird. Anyway, I feel like the entire culture of healthcare is just to kind of like, protect other people at all costs at whatever detriment happens to you. I was talking on, I did a TikTok recently, and I should have a little overlay that shows me where to follow on TikTok. I think it's I'm Nurse Liz. I'm not sure. It might not be. I put it in there. Um, I'll link it below. And it was saying how I was at work one time and I got norovirus from one of my like patients the day before, but I didn't know it until I got to work the next day. And that's the one where you're like spewing out of every hole you own. It's not fun. I feel like everyone's gotten norovirus from the hospital at some point. And I went up and I was like, I have to go home. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning at this point. I was like, I need to go home. I am having GI problems. And she was like, no, you can't. I don't have anyone to replace you. If you leave, I will have to report you as like patient abandonment. And then she went to the pharmacy little return bin and gave me some Zofran from it and was like, go back. And then I said that. And the amount of people that replied to me in my comments and in my DMs were like, I've done the same thing. Like I've had the exact same situation, was horrifying. So we really need to work in healthcare in general and just reminding ourselves that like, this is not normal behavior. If my husband was pooping his brains out and he said, I have to go, and his job said just like, I don't know, sit on a roll of toilet paper, they would be sued. So, it's just interesting what flies in different professions and then what flies in ours. So we're all going to stand up for ourselves. We're going to don our PPE. We're going to tell wildly fabulous stories when we get sick. And when they say you have to come in or you're going to get fired, you're going to say, try. So just work on your stories of, first of all, you don't have to give any explanation when you're calling in. You can just say, I can't come in. But if you decide to give them an explanation, I truly hope that you give them a really good story. Pretend you're hallucinating, come up with interesting, you could make sound effects. That's highly encouraged. If they you feel like they aren't believing you enough, like just find some like interesting YouTube videos of you. I'm sure you'll get creative. It'll be good. Give them something to remember. And like, I know it's not their fault that it's like everyone's in a hard spot because I feel like people are always like, you're so hard on like management and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but like at the same time I am, but also like just go up the chain. Like the hospitals have plenty of money. If they had treated us better in the beginning and like paid healthcare people better, and if we worked in a system that wasn't just money driven, we wouldn't be dealing with this because maybe we would have retained people and maybe they would have felt happier in their job. Anyway, such a mess. But that's my take on the AHA. Yay. Everybody go in and wear a mask. We will preemptively wear N95 respirators if patient is decompensating nearby and they might code. It's not hard and we're all protective. There you go. There you go. You're welcome for the videos. Why don't we do that? Anyways, my small hospital enacted universal COVID PPE precautions for any in-house code. What are universal COVID PPE procedures? I'm interested to see, did they follow this? Isn't that nice when vomit and blood spewing everywhere while intubating and bagging like the last code I was in? Oh, yeah. Codes are messy, friends. Codes are not, people are unwell, and they're often hooked up to a lot of things when they're coded. And there is a lot of times when people are passing away too, there are body fluids coming out from all over, and you're up on beds, you're doing chest compressions, things are getting unhooked. So they're very messy. So it's really like, I always wore PPE. I feel like even in my non-contact precaution patients' rooms, like when I was doing a code, I feel like we just always grabbed it because it was messy. Or you had to like totally change, like, yikes. I've been considering going into nursing, but the more I hear, I don't know, it seems like you're setting yourself up for abuse and failure. It can, at the moment, definitely feel like that. There's definitely good jobs. I loved my second nursing job. I worked in peds for my second nursing job, and it was wildly different than my first. The thing I didn't like about it the most was like the nights, weekends, holidays aspect. But other than that, I mean, we called it Disneyland. It was much better. So if it didn't have weekends and holidays, I probably would have stayed there. because it was a great job. So I think there are definitely great jobs. Obviously, people who are disgruntled like myself, we're probably going to complain louder than people who like it. And I think right now is a hard time to assess, do I want to go in this, because it's a hot mess. Like, I'm hopeful. I would just like watch and wait and see. You can always start the process. You will always have a job in nursing, like even if you don't work in the hospital. The hospital's rough. And like, you know, there's other things you can do with it too. You're going to get good experience. So I would say like if you really want to, go for it, and you don't have to necessarily take a traditional nursing job. Also, I'm really hoping Dree said that a new generation of nurses are not here for abuse and I see a better future for us. I kind of agree. I hope that enough people are coming in that are like, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to take that. Um and I hope we see change. I, because I don't really know the other outcome. You know what I mean? Because it is going to drive everyone away. So I feel like eventually they're going to have to change their tune and start treating healthcare people like the rest of the world treats employees, like the rest of the country, the world treats employees, which is like when you're sick, you don't have to come in, you get a break. You don't have to just be standing for 12 and a half hours straight without food or drink or water, which I think all of this is really funny. Like, you cannot go into a room. You should go into a room, a code with someone with COVID without PPE on. But then at the same time, Jayco's standing over there and they're like, but if you have water at your desk, if you have water at your desk, infection through the roof. Like, that is going to spread infection. What are you doing? Make it make sense. Make it make sense. I think it's also interesting how the Joint Commission has just kind of like, like ghosted, like they vanished during all of this. We're like, isn't there something you're worried about, like infection prevention? Like, isn't that something you stressed about? Why are you telling me to come to work with COVID? Like, Jayco's worried that I have a coffee at my desk, but I can now come to work when I have COVID and then do CPR. Cool. Cool. It's ridiculous that in our town, I don't know if I answered this. Is the future of nursing where we're all private contractors instead of staff? Probably. And making a lot of money. Is it ridiculous? It's ridiculous in our town in PA. There is a PA in a clinic. His wife caught COVID from working in the hospital. He has COVID and is still seeing patients. Good. Oh, good. The medical field does not protect their workers. That is horrifying. And no, and AHAs and RQI. Oh, yeah, the whole thing. It's a mess. Don't forget about putting your lunchbox inside the patient refrigerator. What? Do people put their lunchboxes inside patient refrigerators? I have gotten yelled at by Jayco. The only time our hospitals, both of my units hid me when Jayco came by. So you get a warning when Jayco comes, or the Joint Commissions, and they kind of like rate your hospital on how well they're doing a bunch of different safety measures. And my hospital knew me well enough that they just took me off the schedule for those days and made me work different days because they were like, Liz is not going to talk to the Joint Commission. But one time I slipped through. I think this is probably what prompted them. And they asked me what temperature the med fridge was supposed to be. And I said, pretty chilly. And they did not like that answer. And they said, no, but like what actually? And I said, I don't know. That seems like a whole lot of not my problem. And this was it was in the morning. I had been up for like a day, 24 hours at this point. And then they sat me down, they took me into a different room and they decided to show me the chart. And they were like, well, how would you know? I was like, well, I don't know. Like that is someone else's job. Like if it's obviously warm, I'm not going to use it. And this did not please them. And in the report, I got to find it later. They were reading it and they read that. My manager read that to me later and she was not pleased. She's like, did you really tell them pretty chilly? And I was like, yeah. So if you want to know how to get out of ever having to speak to the Joint Commission, be very sassy. And then you will magically never work on a day when Jayco is in the building. Oh, don't be me. You probably should have less snark than me in your soul. It just oozes out of me. Our emergency room rushes to push patients up to med surg, only to receive a call from the lab that the patient is COVID positive and now expose everyone on that unit. Yay. We used to prophylactically put people on, which I wonder why places don't do. We prophylactically put everyone on contact precautions if they had something that seemed like respiratory-ish, and we didn't have the swap back. So I don't know why we don't do more of that. My sister just said, I don't know how you never got fired. And neither do I. Because I work nights. That's why. I never ever showed my face during the light of day. My manager, my first one, I had worked there for 2 years. And one time I saw her in the elevator, like we were crossing paths, and I like acknowledged her presence. And she said, like, I forget what she said, but she had no idea I worked for her. Like, absolutely no idea. Like, absolutely none. And I was like a charge nurse, a preceptor. Like I was training all the new people. And she said something. She's like, oh, do you work on like this other floor? And I was like, no, I work for you. I literally said that. I was like, no, I work for you. And she's like, oh, I was like, for 2 years, but I'm quitting. And then she like, and then I was like, but I'm leaving next week. And she was like, oh, she's like, oh no, why? I was like, you don't know my name. Anyway, that was that type of a unit. Our universal, as in regardless of COVID positive staff, they are all done in a COVID garb. Oh, see, that's a good. Why don't we do more of that? It's posted on the side, right? On the side of what? I believe we should be more snarky and start advocating for ourselves. I agree. Oh, is the temperature posted on the side? It probably is. They also asked me how I could find that information, and I said I would call downstairs. I don't know where I was going to call. They were like, where would you find this information? I was like, I don't know. I would call the IT department. And they were like, this is not IT's problem. I was like, well, maybe they would tell me whose problem it is. Because that's my solution for everything. I would call IT and you would hear them pick up and they're like, yes, my computer's not working. Is it plugged in? You're like, oh. Oh, they loved us so much. However, the charge and house supers are now required to require results before coming up. So you have to be like COVID tested before you come up. I just want to say thank you to all the healthcare professionals. You all are angels. That's very sweet. But also I think we need to be less angels. I think that's also a common misconception is they're like, oh, like these giving wonderful healthcare providers, like, and they frame it as like healthcare heroes. Obviously, I know you're just trying to be kind and saying angels, but I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, like I couldn't do what you do. Like, what an angel. And it's just my job. And we don't need to put up with abuse. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just like sends this whole like weird nuance into it where you're like, I'm not an angel. I'm just coming here for my paycheck. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then people are like, oh, like that's a weird reason to get into healthcare. And you're like, no, it's like a stable job. There's lots of humans and then they fall apart because we're very faulty. But you're supposed to have a calling and be willing to like lay down everything for this job that like is eating you alive. And here we are. I'm laughing, cried, and they never got fired part. Yeah. I'm grateful I never got fired, but I do attribute that to working exclusively nights and weekends when I have had one of my supervisors like quite literally at one of my jobs, she like told me that one time. She's like, you really ride that line of getting fired. I was like, yeah. But what are we going to do? Nurses need to speak up more. We call the shots. Literally, if we walk out, who will do it? I don't know, but that's not our problem. See, this is what I mean. Like, that sounds harsh, but it's literally not our problem. Like, that is why there's people who get paid a lot of money, like millions and millions of dollars at the top of the healthcare food chain. And maybe if they run into this problem, we'll find out what happens. But like, it's not our job to lay down and fix it. You know, we are employees. If you are not the owner of the company, then you don't have to worry about that. You just have to show up and you can go help somewhere else and maybe they'll treat you nicer. I love working with students with a difficult, AKA mean patient, laying down the line with them and then just saying, I didn't come to work to get yelled at and walking out. You taught me that. That's perfect. Yes. Boundaries. You walk in and you say, this was my, it kind of stinks because once you learn boundaries, then you're always the one that they send into the difficult patient room because then they're like, oh, Liz can handle that. You're like, You can be mean too. You can reach down into that sweet soul, especially in peds. People were very kind. I was like, you can reach down in there. There's an inner darkness of snark and you can pull it out and you can set a firm boundary. But if you're ever in a room and people are being really mean to you, you would just walk in. And as long as like, no one's actively dying, you'd be like, I am here to help you. You are very upset. I did this all the time as an NP. Be like, I don't appreciate the way you are speaking to me right now. When you are ready to listen and we can both have a reasonable conversation, I will be back. And then you just leave. You don't wait for them to say anything. You just turn around and you leave. And usually, well, sometimes they left and sometimes they didn't. I'll come back in a few minutes, exactly, and see if you are ready to more calmly talk. And it worked fairly well because people will just like, scream at you. How are you engaging with patients who are completely against the vaccine, yet now are COVID positive and hospitalized? I'm not engaging with them because I don't work in the hospital. But I mean, like, no, like anyone else. I mean, I don't think it really matters. Like, it's like everything else in healthcare, no matter why they are there or what choices they have made before, that cannot enter in how you are caring for patients. I worked on the first unit I worked on was like a liver, GI, kidney unit. And a lot of the liver failure patients were there because they had a history of either like addiction to alcohol or substance use. And that job was really good in that way of opening my eyes to like, it does not matter what brought this person here. And sometimes that was really hard. It was really hard when you did a liver transplant and then that person came back in for doing the same thing to like this new organ. It was very difficult, but in a lot of times it was good to see that like, you cannot look at what else is happening with that person. You just need to look at what they're here for and what you can do for them. You can't go back. And how I kind of rationalized it with myself was I can't go back and change that person's mind about what they chose. It's none of honestly my business. I can wish that they would have done something different, but I can't change it. And maybe this interaction with this person like could lead to me being like, very civil and treating them like a normal human. That's going to lead to so much more trust and acceptance within the healthcare system that they are obviously lacking. A lot of people I saw this in my patients a lot, that they immediately, like if we're talking about the vaccine, they didn't want the vaccine. They don't trust anything like that. And the only people I was able to convince to get the vaccine were people that trusted me because I had been kind of accepting of who they were as they were without any like hostility. You know what I mean? So we're only going to get people to listen to us if we are just kind and treat everyone like a normal human and be very objective while you're at work. Because while you're at work, that's what you have to be, is like very objective. Doesn't matter what they've done, where they've been, to kind of build a little bit of that trust. And then we can go from there and build on it with like education and later on down the line, maybe conversations. But you just kind of have to block it out and be like, this is where we are. You know what I mean? And it's just, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You're going to have patients who are coming to you who I have had patients who have murdered people and they're in there and they're with the guards from the prison. I've had patients who they are in there because just a multitude of things where you just can't look at it. You just have to look at them as humans and everyone. And it also helped me to realize eventually that like most of the people who are making these choices, even though they're really easy to look at them and be like, hey, you're making a lot of really choices that are really detrimental to you. That's like a hurting human. Like they made those choices because things are not good. So that was a long tangent to say, you just can't think about it. Just be nice. We're savages. Let's be honest. It's true. Healthcare people, rough. Night shift people, more fun. Alyssa said it's tough. It's so hard to continue to show up to work every day and deal with this. But at the end of the day, it's your job to be kind and to educate and do the best you can from there. Yes. And set really good boundaries. The thing I found when I was working in primary care was just setting really good boundaries. I would ask people, do you want the COVID vaccine? If they said no, I said, do you want to talk about it? I have a video about how I talked about it with them. And then we just didn't go into it more. If they said no and they said, I don't want to discuss it, I was like, okay, like kind of realizing you can't save the entire world. You can only so don't waste time trying to convince people who want nothing to do with that conversation. Have conversations with people who are interested in having conversations, and then set the boundary with yourself that, hey, if we're not on the same page, that's fine. You do you. I'm going to keep going over and having conversations with people who are going to engage with me and be interested. So going that way. Was just diagnosed with COVID. Vaccinated a few days ago, and I'm really ashamed to say I'm excited to get 10 days off so I can deal with the short staffing issues. Friend, I cannot tell you how many times I have kind of wished that I had COVID so that I could lock myself in a room away from my darling family for 10 days. Except now we all either had, I don't know if we had COVID or if we had the flu. I had an at-home test kit. And it said I didn't have COVID, but even now at I feel like at 4 p.m., my body's like, oh, it wasn't well. And then my children got it. So I couldn't even lock myself in a room away from them. They got it too. So that didn't turn out the way I thought it would. I'm a second-year nursing student, and I find this very interesting in a slightly stressful way. Remember that everyone's experience is not going to be your own. You're going to have your own experience, and it can be great. And even if it's not great, you can go to a different job. And if that job you don't like that either, you can pivot and take all the skills you learned and go do something else. It'll be okay. Now I work per diem giving COVID vaccines, and I get so excited when I give first doses, even if they aren't as excited because most of them at this point are only doing if they're required to do so. That would give me a little bit of hope in humanity. I'm glad you're liking it. We all made bad decisions in life. For some people that decide to just trust science. Yes. And that's a good reminder too. We've all made unique choices in life. I certainly have. Same, starting a nursing program next month and already ending. Wondering, I think, if I should continue with what's going on in healthcare and other nurses' perspectives. I made a whole video about this. I'll leave it linked below about would I go back and do it again? And the answer is, I don't know. But I kind of compared good experiences to bad experiences. And they were there's so much good, there's so much bad. It's such an interesting career. There's lots you can do with it. So I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. If you feel like you would regret not doing it, give it a go. And if it doesn't work out, pivot. Don't feel bad. There is zero shame in deciding this is not for me. Zero shame in that. I find myself saying, look, you came to us. We didn't seek you out. So more little honey. Yes. You, exactly. When people come in and they're mean, you're like, you came to me. I didn't go and find you. You came to me for help. And then now you're screaming at me because you don't like the answer I gave. What do we deserve? 2 lives with Liz. People just had to make me mad enough. So here we are. I'm going to try, like I said, I'm going to try to do more lives on current events. That way we can have a conversation about them. And hopefully, it becomes sort of a thing. I don't know. I don't have anything else to talk about after this. So if anything comes up and you're like, oh, we should chat about that, just send it to me in a comment or a message somewhere. Maybe email me. I'm really bad at responding to Instagram messages. What does a discussion with coworkers who are anti-vaccine or anti-COVID precautions look like? Doctors, nurses, healthcare providers are one of the worst types of patients. I have a whole video on this that let me write myself a note to link that. And it goes through it. It goes through the exact way I have that conversation. Hang on, let me see if I can actually pull it up. YouTube. That is COVID. I can't find it. Okay, I'll worry about later. I'll find it and I'll link it in here. But I literally just show you exactly what I said. If you search my name and then discuss COVID, then it should show up, and it kind of shows you the boundaries that I set with it. All of that. And then I have one, man, I can't find it to save my life. Oh, well. That's all in there. Just being very objective about it and respecting their choice. If they don't want to listen, that's totally fine. Don't use their time. Don't waste yours. People are allowed to make their own healthcare decisions about what they want to do. And I think we kind of forgot that. So, I mean, you aren't going to convince them by being nasty at the end of the day. My son got his first COVID vaccination today for ages 5 to 11. That is very relieving, I would have to imagine. Mine are not. Neither of my girls are old enough to get it. But I imagine it would be like a relief if I knew they could. You think people will feel different about COVID vaccine if there were at least 5 years of data before releasing the vaccine? No, I think people would still probably find something to say something about, because if we look at the reality of it, almost all complications from a vaccine happen. And we're not going to get like terribly into like I don't want to get into like a vaccine debate. Most of the reactions that people are going to have from a vaccine happen within a few weeks after getting it, if not the week to 10 days after. So, what is 5 days of data going to do when we have all you need are case counts? You know what I mean? Since almost zero, very, very, very few reactions to vaccines happen in the long term versus the short term. So having more people, like, we have a long time of a vaccine that we're looking at the data for, because we need a long time to get people vaccinated. So the time isn't the thing, it's the number of people vaccinated that those studies are looking for. I think that's gotten miscommunicated. People are like, oh, that we don't have enough long-term data. The reason most vaccines have long-term data is because they look at the numbers and then they do the science part and the math statistics part, and they say you need by 1 million people to get this vaccine in the trial. That's a lot. It probably would be more like, I don't know, let's do 100,000. You need 100,000 people to have a vaccine in this trial, and that takes 3 years, 4 years to have 100,000 people willing to take this new vaccine. We shortened that time. We didn't shorten the amount of time we're monitoring people. People are still being monitored, but like they didn't do anything different. So many people got the vaccine so quickly that we hit that number super duper fast because we're in a pandemic and this is new. So I don't think people would think anything of it differently. I think people are using time as a reason to not get it. I get that it's new, so it causes hesitation. And I'm fine with that, honestly. In my patients who are really hesitant about it, and I don't think it's fair to necessarily judge people who don't get it if they're willing to have a conversation with me about it. I had some people that we had a really good conversation about it. They spoke their concerns, we discussed it, and they just didn't think it was a good choice for them. And that's fine. As long as you're willing to have a good conversation about it and like actually listen to what someone else has to say. At the end of the day, I think you are in charge of your body. And as long as you're fine with the repercussions, like of that choice, I think that's where another thing got totally out of hand is it's like, I'm not in charge of the repercussions of your choice, though. So then people were asking me to lie about their medical histories in order to exempt them from the repercussion that they didn't want. I'm like, I didn't tell your employer to make this mandate. It just got a mess. So this isn't about that. I look at the vaccine like that. You give them the information, and at the end of the day, it's their right to take it or refuse it, move on and go to the next thing. Exactly. As with all things in healthcare, hey, I really think you should, probably not exclusively eat French fries, but at the end of the day, you get to decide that. I'll be finishing my MP coursework in May, and I'm just watching this happen and wondering how things are going to change from when I worked in the hospital before. I have said many times I am not jealous of the people who are in school right now. I think it would be really hard to watch everyone be so frustrated and to not get really discouraged. Like I felt like school was really discouraging just in itself because school is hard. And then to have all of this go out, what a mess. I look at the vaccine thing. Oh yeah, we already talked about that. I'm a homeless outreach nurse. It's an amazing, rewarding job, but COVID has made it very scary. We're fighting a public health crisis. I enjoy educating and advocating for the unseen and unheard. So this is a great example of an awesome non-traditional nursing job. Thank you for reminding us that there's more of those like that, because I think it's easy to forget. We're like, oh, I have to do this one job, but there's so many jobs. However, the trend of non-jab snark or bias is getting old. Just do the job for sure. Oh, it's so old. I won't even engage with it anymore. I used to try to make educational TikToks and things like that on it, and I'm just done. I'm done. That's a wrap for me. So that's why I don't talk about it a lot. People are always like, oh, you should do like an updated vaccine video. I'm like, no, no. And that's like a personal boundary. You can kind of go until you know you're done. And then you're going to know when you're done. And when you're done, you should probably just be done before you say things you regret. All right, friends, I think I'm going to wrap things up. I have to go figure out what I am going to make this week for dinner, which is my least favorite task because we're going grocery shopping today because we've eaten all of our food and then we've transitioned into like eating the weird leftovers and pretending that it's like a picnic lunch type of food. When you're eating like celery and a leftover chicken nugget and a salsa and stuffing. Like that's kind of how we've been existing for a few days. So we're going to try to fix that. But thank you for being here. Thank you for having conversation with me about this. This is so much more enjoyable than me just talking at you about these types of things. When we're talking about current events. If you have anything else that you think we should talk about, I think I would be happy to chat about them and do more of things like these if you guys like them. I just don't have any other current events. These were the two big ones. I was like, well, here we go. And hopefully life will just get quiet again. Leah said she loves the asthma education. Nurse that came to our pediatric class. I'm like, this is a career. Yeah. See, things like that. I used to think that I wanted to go and do like diabetes education in children. I did a ton with that in nursing school. I did like a camp for kids with type 1 diabetes, and that was fascinating. So like, there's a lot of different things you can do with it that aren't necessarily like working in the hospital hands-on. All right. Thanks for hanging out, friends. I hope you stay safe. You don that PPE. You don it nimbly, even if you aren't as nimble. It's totally fine. I hope you stay safe and you remember that you are far more important than any job ever, and you need to take care of yourself. And I will see you next time. Bye.